When Tim Leary came back from this summer trip in Mexico where he had experienced the mushrooms, he was really talking about that a lot. And the thing that I noticed was that some of the other graduate students who were friends of mine, George Litwin, Gunther Weil, and so forth, had already had some experiences with Tim Leary of these substances. I had not. But I noticed that I remember this feeling of listening to them talk about their experiences, and there was a certain quality in their tone of voice and the way they talked about these experiences that was very different than the kind of conversations graduate students would usually have with one another, which would be about sort of joking, kidding, cynical kind of stuff. And so that really intrigued me, and I listened to them, what they said, and I was really very cautious and afraid of drugs of any kind. But then Leary started this project with working with convicts. He said, well, this is a perfect way for us to test out the possibilities of behavior change, because you've got an objective behavioral measure. Will the convicts, after undergoing this experience, be less likely to return? And so he wanted to do this project, and so I went to him and said, I'd like to participate in that project. And he was a little dubious, I guess, just from knowing me or not knowing me, whatever. But then he did say, well, as part of the project, you'd have to take it, because it was part of the existential transactional approach. You didn't give drugs to people like a guinea pig kind of a laboratory situation. You took it with them. So I said, fine, that's actually what I wanted to do. So I had one psychedelic experience with him in his house with other people. That was kind of an introduction with the psychiatrist and various other people, some other graduate students. And then after that, my first 10 to 20 psychedelic experience took place in a jail, a maximum security prison, with convicts. Because the way we would do it would be half the graduate students, or about 4 or 5 graduate students, and about 6 or 8 convicts in each day. We would go in, and half the convicts and half the graduate students would take the drug in the morning, and the other half would sit and assist, and then in the afternoon we would switch roles. I remember the exact moment that it happened. I actually went outside the room, and the house where we were, it was a winter's day, and I went out through the front door, and I passed the garbage can, and I found myself sort of thinking, oh, well, there's the garbage can, I'll just keep going. And I thought, wait a minute, I don't have to do that. I could look at the garbage can if I want to. I could even look inside it. And I thought, well, why would I want to? Well, that wasn't the point. The point was that I realized how I was operating on automatic. I just automatically go in this kind of conditioned way. And I didn't have to do that. I could be totally present in the moment and choose to attend to whatever there was to look at, even things that you normally don't look at, like garbage, which is to be thrown away. And that was the kind of moment when I realized, well, that means I can attend to anything, inside me or outside of me, and I don't have to be the victim of whatever is being presented at me. And so then I went outside, and I was looking inside, and I saw Timothy and the others inside the room, and there was snow lying around outside, so I picked up a snowball and I kind of threw it against the screen window, and Timothy sort of saw me, and he picked up a little pillow and he threw it against the screen window from the inside. And so that was a kind of a symbolic recognition of how the inside and the outside kind of come together and meet each other. That's like great. That. So it was really a beautiful experience. And another thing that happened was really interesting, that there was this hypersuggestibility that you're into these states. So anything that's said, any music that's played, anything that anybody says or does has a profound effect on your consciousness, and you get all these implications of it. That's why set and setting and really paying careful attention to the ritual is so important, because if you don't, then whatever happens will just influence your session really profoundly, and that could be good or it could be kind of complicated. We had this friend, Michael Kahn, who's a psychology professor and therapist, and he was a fellow graduate student, and he came into psychology graduate study from being an actor. He was a Shakespearean actor, a very dramatic kind of person with a deep booming voice and a really formidable presence. So we would get into a session before 6 or 7 people, and then he would announce, well, we're doing this play. You're so-and-so and you're so-and-so. I remember one time he said, we're doing T.S. Eliot's The Cocktail Party, and you're this character, and you're this character, and this is what we're acting out, and this is the story. And then we would be caught in the story, sometimes for weeks afterwards. I remember for weeks afterwards, we were still acting out that story, which sometimes was a little bit of a disadvantage because I didn't even know the story. But it was just an illustration of how profoundly, the simplest words or actions, or particularly stories and images, can affect the whole course of an experience and have a lasting effect.
You talked about the importance of the set and setting.
Right.
And at somewhere along the line, and I'm not sure which year, this book came about.
Right.
That the psychedelic experience that you co-authored.
Right. Well, my understanding is that the idea for this came from Huxley. I didn't meet Huxley personally, but that's what Tim said. I mean, I think Huxley even talks about it in Doors of Perception, or one of his books, that he says, it's like this is like dying, and that you'd want to have somebody like the Tibetans do. You'd want to have somebody there who's kind of reminding you that this is what's happening, and then you could have a reasonable chance of making it through to a really powerful spiritual, mystical experience. So then and we started then. So that was the idea, and we actually worked on this in the first year that we went to Mexico. We did 2 trips in Zihuatanejo. The first year, just a few of us graduate students went down. And I think you were down there too. Yeah, right. Actually, Tim and Dick had found this place, this Zihuatanejo. So the first year was a summer. We went down just to explore what would happen if we didn't have to go to classes or give lectures or, have any of these other commitments. Could just concentrate on doing these inner explorations. And we stayed there for about, I think, a month or something like that, and started to work on this as a session manual, basically, and then translating the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and taking the inherent structure, but just leaving out the particularly Tibetan Buddhist imagery. And it was very interesting to see how well it applied, and how well it could be. You could identify certain characteristic psychedelic experiences in this, which is not to say that this particular sequence is necessarily always a sequence experiences happen. In fact, they usually don't, very rarely. But then the Tibetans say that themselves. It's only really advanced yogis who, with a lot of preparation, a lot of training, who were able to, right at the very moment of death, kind of just go through to the clear light. And most people who don't have the training wouldn't be able to do that. So there was a lot of sort of stabbing around in the dark, and people expecting to see light bulbs go off, and that not happening, of course, and then wondering, well, what's with this model and so forth. But still, the basic idea, I think, was valid, that you could make that comparison. This country doesn't have a very good attitude towards drugs of any kind, and makes no distinction between drugs of different kinds. And all drugs are automatically bad. All drugs are categorized as addictive, damaging to your brain, and narcotic, and all of that, and that's simply not true. So, but it's understandable in terms of if you know the history. I mean,
is this an error that the next generation can straighten out, or is it hopeless?
No, it can be straightened out. I actually think the way that the drug war, which is a lunatic kind of misguided thing that just sends innocent people to prison, and deprives society of the contributions of thousands of creative people who've done nothing more than taking some drugs. But it's not even a good way to deal with really dangerous or harmful drugs like cocaine or heroin or addictive drugs, as many other countries have already demonstrated. But I think compared to the social problems associated with cocaine or heroin and alcohol and tobacco, the problems associated with LSD are piddling. I mean, they're totally insignificant. And people have shown this. Sociologists have done the studies over and over again. You look at deaths or medical consequences or anything like that. These don't even play a role.
What about marijuana? It was legal until the 19...
Yeah, right. Well, it's all part of that same kind of puritanical assault, which now has, you know, tremendous special interest groups on both sides of the law. You know, it has gangsters who continue to reap huge profits, and various government agents whose livelihood and career depend on keeping that thing going. But I think actually historically or politically, I go with those people who think that prohibition, which it is, it's another experiment in prohibition. And you know, the alcohol prohibition was repealed in 1935 in the height of the Depression. I think it's going to take that. I think once the new Depression hits, which it will, which will be much deeper and greater than the one that was in the 30s, then people will realize, well, this is absurd. You know, we could be the government, we could be getting this money instead of having it go to gangsters. We really need it now. You know, that's what they said in the Depression. You know, why should we, you know, let the Al Capone and his buddies continue to reap the benefits, and the alcohol brewery companies, of course, they were ready. They'd been making this little cheap, you know, very low alcohol beer, and they said, well, we could tool over, just give us the word. And within 2 weeks, they had the barrels and the trucks rolling out, you know, with the beer, and so it closed down the speakeasy. And the gangsters went on to something else. I mean, you don't have to worry about them.
So this prohibition can come to an end?
I think it will come to an end, yeah. But I think it's going to take depression before it does so. I saw Tim as being more and more kind of influenced by media and media perceptions, and, you know, cutting up the clippings and being conscious of what people were saying about him, and trying to reach the largest audience and make the biggest splash.
You're
so
saying Tim had a social political intention.
Well, I saw him as being kind of basically almost like enthralled to that, you know, being more increasingly concerned with image and popularity, celebrity status. And other people who were in Millbrook, who, you know, friends of mine who said the same thing, you know, ordinary young people who
so at that point
perceived that.
Had he taken one too many trips? Was that possible, that he became
that
chaotic?
and
was that a sense that you had?
That what?
That he was becoming chaotic in some sense?
No, I think he was caught up in the celebrity game. I think the way I would put it. I don't know if that has necessarily to do with trips, but
there wasn't a point.
No inner direction, no vision really. The vision that was there originally was kind of lost.
There wasn't a point that he went too far, that you felt he went too far with the drugs, and he was now kind of in a...
He himself or his theory?
No, he himself.
No, with the drugs.
With his own experimentations.
No, I think it was a political thing. And at one point I said to him, you know, and I became involved in various methods of yoga and other forms of therapy that involved changing consciousness, and so what I wanted to know what, you know, taking drugs was not the only way that people have used in the past, and wanted to explore that also. And it just occurred to me that turn on, tune in, drop out is okay for a start, you know, but it's at a certain point you come back, because we still live in the society. You know, it did seem to me a little bit hypocritical or paradoxical to give a press conference and say drop out. I mean, because you're giving a press conference, you're not dropped out.
That's a good point. I was already separated from Tim, but I was very opposed to dropout also. I just felt that dropout was a red flag to a bull of the society. It was just asking for the society to come down on you. The word dropout has a very pejorative implication. And it was really turn on, tune in, and then bring your creative forces into your life, whatever they are.